Well, welcome to the 700 Club. From a Jewish man being shot in Chicago to all-out calls for Jew hunts, anti-Semitic violence is sending shockwaves across communities worldwide.
CBN's Brody Carter reports on the latest wave of attacks and explores possible solutions to the growing crisis.
It has felt like it's open season on the Jews, certainly since October 7th and the massacre in Israel. It seems to have ignited a terrible bloodlust against Jews around the world.
This scene from Amsterdam, where organized mobs targeted Israeli soccer fans. Attackers calling for a, quote, Jew hunt led to the eruption of violence. Despite a nationwide ban on demonstrations there, pro-Palestinian protests led to further clashes and more than a dozen arrests. In Chicago, a Jewish man shot walking to a synagogue in broad daylight. He survived, and it's being investigated as a hate crime. And protesters waving Nazi flags in Howell, Michigan, gathered outside the American Legion Post, hosting a performance of the Diary of Anne Frank.
There is a strain of radical Islam also around the world that we've seen with mass migration to Europe and the United States that is all too willing to go along with this radical philosophy that is Jew-hating.
Experts monitoring this trend, like former State Department envoy Eli Cohanim, says with radical ideology spreading faster than ever, governments worldwide need to take stronger action.
We saw a 50% rise in the number of Jews that are now hiding their identity.
E.J. Kimball with the Combat Anti-Semitism movement sees a disease of hate spreading, and that 1 in 5 Jewish American children have experienced anti-Semitism since October 7th. He tells CBN News a simple solution is calling out anti-Semitism for what it is.
A definition of anti-Semitism called the IHRA, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance working definition of anti-Semitism. It is the gold standard definition.
The beginning of that definition being anti-Semitism is a certain perception of Jews, which may be expressed as hatred toward Jews.
When you adopt the definition, which is the first step, it sends a message. But when you actually embrace that definition and enforce it and implement it, that's where law enforcement now has the tools to stop this stuff.
As reports of these incidents increase, Jewish communities are calling for greater solidarity and action from all faiths.
But even more than that, you've got to stand up and call out evil when it rears its ugly head. And that means when in Washington, D.C. last week on the anniversary of Kristallnacht, when the one kosher restaurant was attacked, the windows were smashed in, it means coming out, condemning it for what it is.
Both Kimball and Cohanim agree that confronting this issue goes beyond symbolic gestures. It requires enforcing existing laws and empowering communities to stand firm against hatred. Brody Carter, CBN News.
Well, anti-Semitism is a spiritual force. The rabbis say in every single generation, a Haman arises who wants to wipe the Jews out. Let's get familiar with the terminology. If you want to know that definition, it's holocastremembrance.com. It's available on cbnnews.com if you want a link back to it. But we need to look beyond what are definitions and look to the spirit behind it. There is an enemy of our souls, and he has been around for a long time. And he understands God's time clock. He understands what that means. He understands what the restoration of the modern state of Israel means. He wants to do everything in his power to stop it. So we as Christians need to stand with our brothers and sisters in the faith. We're grafted into that olive tree. That's what the Apostle Paul clearly wrote. We're grafted into it. Their God is our God. Their Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is ours. Their prophets are ours, and we need to stand with them in their time of need and resist this. It's a spiritual force, and we need to respond with weapons that are not carnal, but are spiritual. We should pray, and we should stand with them and let them know they're not alone in this battle. We're with them in it. In other news, Israel may be on the verge of a ceasefire with Lebanon. John Jessup has that story and more from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
Thanks, Gordon. President-elect Donald Trump is said to be good to go with a ceasefire plan, and it could go into effect before he takes office in January. CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell brings us the story from Jerusalem.
The U.S. has reportedly given Lebanon a draft plan for a ceasefire with Israel, according to Reuters. And according to the Wall Street Journal, that came after the president-elect signed off on a ceasefire proposal while meeting with Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer at Mar-a-Lago. For months, Israel has operated with a limited arms embargo by the Biden administration. But Trump has announced on day one of his administration he will remove all restrictions and delays on transferring weapons and combat equipment to Israel. However, that promise may be tied to a ceasefire deal, and there are still reportedly key disagreements to be worked out, including Israel's ability to strike Hezbollah if necessary. Some in Israel have been insisting in recent days that Israel must be able to protect itself.
We will not have any ceasefire, we will not stop, and we will not take our foot off the gas.
The military campaign will continue until the immediate threat from Lebanon is removed and residents of our north can return safely to their homes in sovereign Israeli territory. Israel will not accept the existence of a terrorist military array on our northern border. We know what their intent is. It's to harm our people. Hezbollah's Conquer the Galilee plan, it made very clear an invasion and massacre on a larger scale than the October 7th massacre.
For now, the war against Hezbollah has expanded to Syria, where it manufactures weapons for Hezbollah.
We will attack any attempt to transfer weapons from Syria to Hezbollah, and we will attack any infrastructure we identify in Syria that is intended to produce weapons for Hezbollah.
The IDF also attacked the military headquarters of Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Damascus, and it released intelligence of an extensive military infrastructure Hezbollah built along Israel's border. The infrastructure was designed to launch an even greater attack on northern Israeli towns than Hamas did on October 7th. And in the war against Hamas in the south, hundreds of terrorist fighters have either surrendered or been eliminated. Given Israel's progress, many are now considering what comes next when the war in Gaza is over. Reportedly, Israel plans a long-term presence in Gaza to gather intelligence, operate where needed, establish a border buffer zone, and crush the Hamas military entirely. And a new report identified 12 principals of UNRWA schools are active members of terror organizations. Many of them held high-level positions in their terror units. This report contradicts the claims by UNRWA that it is committed to tolerant and anti-extremist education. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Thank you, Chris. Well, here in Washington, senators are again considering how to deal with another cabinet nomination by President-elect Donald Trump. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. tapped to lead the Department of Health and Human Services. He would be in charge of multiple federal agencies and could shake up many of them, like the Food and Drug Administration. Trump wrote, quote, "For too long, Americans have been crushed by the industrial food complex and drug companies who've engaged in deception, misinformation, and disinformation when it comes to public health." But Colorado's Democratic Governor Jared Polis supported him, writing online, quote, "He helped us defeat vaccine mandates in Colorado in 2019 and will help make America healthy again by shaking up HHS and FDA." Controversy is still swirling around Trump's nomination for U.S. Attorney General, former Florida Republican Congressman Matt Gaetz. Many Senate Republicans doubt he'll get enough votes to be confirmed amid questions about sexual misconduct allegations. And Democratic senators are asking the House Ethics Committee to turn over its report on Gaetz, which was set to be released before he resigned from Congress after Trump announced his nomination.
I'm calling on the House Ethics Committee to preserve and share their report and all relevant documentation on Mr. Gaetz with the Senate Judiciary Committee.
Trump is also nominating North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum to head up the Department of the Interior, and former Georgia Republican Congressman Doug Collins, chaplain in the U.S. Air Force Reserve Command, to lead the Department of Veterans Affairs. Well, a federal appeals court has upheld an Indiana ban on gender transition treatments for minors. A panel of judges ruled 2-1 that the law does not violate the constitutional rights of transgender children or their parents. Indiana Republican Attorney General Todd Rokita wrote on X that the ruling, quote, is a huge win for Hoosiers and will help protect our most precious gift from God, our children. He went on to say, by rejecting the injunction against our common sense state law, dangerous and irreversible gender transition procedures for minors will remain banned in Indiana. The ACLU of Indiana says it's weighing its options for an appeal. 26 states have banned or restricted various gender transition treatments. The Indiana decision comes as the Supreme Court is set to hear a case on the issue in December. The Biden administration is challenging a Tennessee law that forbids doctors from performing gender transition surgery and other procedures on minors. Gordon, back to you.
Well, it's a victory for common sense. It's also a victory for medical science, because the science of treatment is showing that it doesn't really work, that you're not having positive outcomes, both in terms of depression, outlook on life, all of these things. It's not really working as they think it's supposed to. And so why go through these irreversible treatments when someone is a minor? When you become an adult, okay, you have that ability to make decisions, but when you're 10 years old, 12 years old, 16 years old, you're making permanent decisions, and you don't really have the information necessary. What's amazing to me is that people are resisting the medical science, which is showing the outcomes aren't what you think they are, and it's not leading to positive outcomes. If medical treatments aren't leading to positive outcome, well, then there's no reason to do the medical treatment.